bring up, Representative Walker mentioned the Lamont Criminal Justice Policy Transition Committee, and we're lucky enough to have some members of that, including co-chair here today, and I'd like to bring them up and talk a little bit about the work that they did, and some of the work that's happening now in the legislature as a follow-up, and what's going on also in the Lamont administration with this. So, Sarah? Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Andrew. My name is Sarah Russell. I teach at Quinnipiac University School of Law, and I run a legal clinic there along with some colleagues. We focus on issues of sentencing, prison conditions, prisoner reentry issues. So it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us. So I had the privilege to serve as co-chair of the Criminal Justice Policy Committee, which was a committee of experts and criminal justice stakeholders that made recommendations to Governor Lamont and his transition team earlier this year. The group is made up of people passionate about these issues with different experiences and perspectives about the criminal justice system, and I have some of them here with me today. We divided our work into different working groups and developed written recommendations after discussion. Those are available on the governor's website. Our working group topics were appointment of prosecutors and reform of charging practices, marijuana legalization and remedying the harms caused by criminalization, preparing people in prison for life after incarceration, welcoming formerly incarcerated people into society and addressing the collateral consequences of convictions, building off the success of Raise the Age, reforming Connecticut's money bail system, reform of parole release and revocation practices, and reducing the number of people deported as the result of criminal justice conduct. So we'll talk about some of those issues today, and we do have written materials if anyone wants to feel free to follow up with me about any of those issues. So what I'm going to do is briefly summarize some of our recommendations that this committee made back earlier this year, and then you'll hear in more detail from some other members of the committee about some of those recommendations. We'll then hear from Mark Pelka, the Undersecretary of Criminal Justice Policy and Planning, about the Lamont administration's priorities and progress in the area of criminal justice reform. All right, so we recommended, our committee, that the governor appoint leaders to key positions who share his commitment to ending mass incarceration and eliminating racial disparities. We suggested that the administration should support expansion of prison education programs and the true worth units, facilitate the work of more volunteers in prison, including formerly incarcerated people as volunteers in the prisons, and also create a citizens advisory board to help advise the Department of Correction. We recommended that the administration should prioritize the goal of obtaining DMV identification for every person leaving prison and create a new position of Director of Reentry, a person who would maximize collaboration among the many groups involved in supporting reentry. We said the efforts underway to reform the parole revocation system should continue and accelerate. We also recommended that the governor should support legislation on various topics, including a bill expanding the authority and increasing the autonomy of the Criminal Justice Commission and requiring prosecutors to collect and publicly report data, clean slate legislation providing for the automatic erasure of some convictions after a person's been crime-free for a period of time, a bill prohibiting discrimination on the basis of a criminal record, and also Raise the Age legislation phasing 18-year-old emerging adults into the juvenile justice system, allowing 19 and 20-year-olds to access youthful offender status in the adult court, and removing children under age 18 from DOC facilities. We also recommended that the governor should support legislative efforts aimed at eliminating or at least reducing the cost of phone calls for prisoners, giving prisoners the right to vote, changing the sex offender registry to a risk-based system, and reducing the number of people deported as a result of criminal justice contact. Finally, we urge the governor to ensure that legislation legalizing marijuana seek to remedy the harms of criminalization including putting the burden on the state to undertake the effort of identifying and erasing prior marijuana possession convictions rather than requiring individuals to petition for relief in each individual case. As longer-term goals, we recommended that the governor should support efforts to change our charging system so prosecutors review cases right after arrest to determine what, if any, charges should be filed in court. And a pilot program is underway in some jurisdictions that we thought should be expanded. We also recommended that the governor should appoint a working group tasked with recommending a design for a pretrial justice system that reduces the number of people held in pretrial detention and removes money bail as a means of detaining people. And we noted that all these reforms would ultimately result in savings to the state, as the reforms are focused on lowering incarceration rates, reducing recidivism, strengthening communities, and helping those with records obtain education, jobs, and housing. And as costs are saved, we stress it's critical to employ a justice reinvestment strategy to ensure that a significant portion of the savings are invested in strategies that decrease crime, reduce recidivism, and help restore communities. So we had a long list of recommendations, and I'd love to turn it over now to some of my colleagues here to talk in more detail about some of those recommendations and sort of where they're moving, where they've been moving so far this year. So David, why don't we start with you? And if each person could introduce themselves at the start.
Sure. So David McGuire, I'm the executive director of the ACLU here in Connecticut. And as Senator Winfield noted, we have a Smart Justice campaign right now. Gus is here as one of our field organizers, and we've been working on making sure that some of the promises that came out of the transition team are actually executed on. And I have some really good news to report in that a lot of them are moving forward. The issue that our organization is most passionate about, and Mark Pelka will speak to this as well, is the prosecutorial data collection. Right now in Connecticut, prosecutors essentially operate in a black box. They use a paper file system largely, and there is an FOI exemption, meaning that the public cannot access information about what prosecutors do and who they impact. We do have on the other end of the system very, very good corrections data, which shows us that about 2/3 of the people in Connecticut prisons and jails are black or brown. We just don't know exactly how they get there. We know policing practices have a big part of it, but it's undeniable that prosecutors are some of, if not the most powerful people in the courtroom. They really do hold people's lives in their hands. Nationally, about 95% of cases are resolved, criminal cases are resolved by plea deal. So it's very important to understand how prosecutors are operating. So thankfully, the transition team made a recommendation that Governor Lamont took up on prosecutorial data collection, which is really the cornerstone to diagnosing the front end of our system and figuring out ways to combat racial disparities and end the mass incarceration pipeline. And that is Bill 880. It's a Senate bill that had a really good hearing in the Judiciary Committee last Monday, I believe. And it's getting really broad support. The prosecutors are on board with it. Judicial has been working closely with the advocates and with the governor's office. And it's significant because it would create public data that we advocates and stakeholders and policymakers could use to make data-informed decisions. So under the bill, as it currently stands, there would be data collected by DCJ, the Division of Criminal Justice, judicial branch, and other stakeholders on arrests, arraignment, diversionary programs, who gets them, some outcome data, plea agreements, and restitution. And this will really open things up and I think allow prosecutors to better run their own offices and also allow legislators to make really informed decisions as we move towards more criminal justice reform. Significantly, Representative Walker talked about the Criminal Justice Commission. That's the commission that appoints and reappoints state's attorneys in Connecticut. And they're really making those decisions in a place of, in the dark essentially. They don't have any data to make these decisions on. So significantly, this bill would have Mark Pelka, as the Undersecretary of Criminal Justice, report to the Criminal Justice Commission annually on their findings, and also make that available to the public on their website. So this is a real first step in the next wave of criminal justice reform here in Connecticut. And I urge you all to support that. It doesn't sound like a really exciting bill, just a data collection bill, but it really is going to pave the way for future reform. The other thing that I'll just mention briefly before I pass it on is the anti-discrimination bill that Sarah just mentioned. The committee put forward a recommendation that there be protections to prevent people with criminal records from being discriminated against based on those records. And significantly, a very broad bill passed out of the Labor Committee about a week and a half ago. That's House Bill 6921. And that bill would make it illegal for employers, education facilities, landlords, et cetera, to discriminate against someone based on their criminal record. We know, being here on Reentry Day, that criminal record really is an impediment to people getting back into society and being successful. So we're hopeful that that bill, or the clean slate bills, which are similar, will move forward this session and get your support. So thank you.
I'd like to ask a question. Are you planning on getting liaison people to speak to the youth that come from my neighborhood in Hartford?
So that's not a focus of any of these bills, but I absolutely
But I'm
think
saying
that's
you're speaking these kids understand what you're saying, recidivism and things like that. These kids don't understand that. You're gonna have to get somebody to talk to them in a way they can understand it.
absolutely.
Because they're gonna look at you like you're crazy. They're worried about staying alive. And these issues right here, they're not gonna look at them like nothing unless you're able to get to them.
No, I absolutely get that. One of the things that I think is most exciting about the Smart Justice campaign that we're running is, as Senator Winfield mentioned, it is grounded and led by justice-impacted people. So we have a cohort of justice-impacted people from all over the state who, if you're here, you'll see them lobbying in their People Not Prison shirts. So we are intimately connected with the community, and it's a very different system than honestly the ACLU has ever employed in the past, and we're getting better results and more meaningful results, and communities are actually leading that conversation, which is exciting. So your point is well taken. We can certainly do better in that way.
So you mean that you will have actual people that's been in prison?
That's right. So we have 3 people that have served time in Connecticut DOC lobbying our bills this year.
Thank you.
Also may want to mention in terms of who just got recently appointed to the Criminal Justice Commission.
Sure. So one of the work of Smart Justice actually started over the summer, and we decided that we had an opportunity to hopefully impact the next governor and his or her platform. So we came up with a survey essentially, and eventually a pledge, which 2/3 of the candidates running for governor filled out. Significantly, now Governor Lamont filled out many pledges, one of which was to appoint a justice-impacted person to the Criminal Justice Commission, the commission that appoints and reappoints prosecutors. And significantly, earlier this week, the governor's office did follow through and nominated Dwayne Betts, who is a formerly incarcerated person, to that commission. As Representative Walker said, there's a bill pending right now that would create a statutory obligation for the CJC to always have a justice-impacted person, but we are definitely trying to change the lens here. I mean, our grounding principle is people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So I hear you loud and clear.
Thanks, David. So I'm going to.
This commission is the one that appoints prosecutors?
Yeah, so it's a 6-member commission, and the chief state's attorney sits on it as well. And they appoint prosecutors and reappoint them.
I would offer as just some help. That is, are we sure the person can get there wherever they meet and when they meet? Because if the person is employed, they may have to take off. No compensation for that. So it may become a hardship for them. So make sure you check into whether or not there are any hardships created for the person to participate to make the difference that you want to have made.
Those are great points.
Great. I'm going to turn this over to James now to talk about the sort of reforms related to prison and preparing people in prison to re-enter communities.
Good morning. My name is James Jetter. I'm a Tau Fellow at Yale Prison Case Initiative, a co-head organizer of Unlock the Vote, and a student at Trinity. Prior to that, I was incarcerated from ages 17 to 36. I'm not turned 39. Turned 39 today, actually. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. What better place to be, right? So, three of the recommendations that we touched on and submitted to the governor were concerning taking prison and kind of structuring it more like the German model in ways that were applicable throughout. So the first recommendation was actually shifting the assessment process that everyone has to go through and making it more like the German model. So in Germany, the way the assessment operates is that it's contractual. It's a meeting of two sides. It's a meeting of the state and a meeting of the individual, and both are in a place where they're saying we've messed up. We've created this space. How do we get you to a place where you're better? And so they start off by asking the person, what do you want to be? And what do you want your time to look like? And in that, their assessment structures an individual's time of incarceration, and it becomes contractual. We will provide these things if you fulfill these things. And if you change the beginning of someone's time of incarceration, you shift the entire system. You shift how you give parole structured metrics on the individual, which parole currently doesn't have. What we currently have is offenders accountability packet, which only applies to those who are allowed to receive earned credits. I had a packet, but I never received earned credits, so there was nothing that made me like take drug programming. So I didn't feel like I needed it, and so I didn't take it because what can they take from me for not taking it, right? So the packets aren't tailored to the individual, and the individual has no say in what their packet looks like. If you make these changes and you change your assessment to deal with trauma, the 1199 SEIU's social workers and medical staff have voiced that they want more say in this process around tending to people in their capacity as social workers and medical staff coming into the system, so that way they're able to better treat them throughout their incarceration. Often the biggest mental health struggle in prison is anxiety and depression, which often goes undiagnosed and overlooked. So shifting what assessment is in the state can really restructure how people do the time. My assessment was, do you do drugs? No. You hear voices? No. You want to kill yourself? No. That was my whole entire mental health drug assessment at the age of 18. The second recommendation was the expansion of school programs in DOC. Right now, Connecticut has around 30,000+ manufacturing jobs, which I know the governor is excited about bringing more program into the prison. But there is also several thriving liberal arts programs that need to exist in their capacity and be able to grow. All forms are needed. The same way we have options in the world on what we want to do, whether we want to go into a vacation or go to college, or those same options need to exist in these spaces in order for our men and women to be prepared to come home and on a larger scale. And the last recommendation that we had was actually about revocations of parole. So the majority of returns in our state are non-criminal offenses. And so we have a culture that is shoot first, ask questions later. And so people are sent back to prison for dirty urines, drug addiction, for missing curfews, violations of a bracelet, missing appointments. All these things are non-criminal offenses. At times, there are even more combative issues with the parole officer themselves. And a revocation is at least 90 to 120 days. And so that disruption in anyone's life can cause them everything from employment to housing. But there's a bill right now the bill that Senator Winfield and Representative Walker are going to the hearing on is HB 6723, which is the reform to parole bill, where in the bill, the recommendation is that it's a risk assessment process on revocations where it's not one offense that sends you back. It's, whatever they come up with. If you miss 4 appointments with your parole officer, as opposed to missing one and having a rearrest issued. If having drug addiction not dealt with through cell therapy, but through actual drug addiction therapy and rehabs rather than prison. So this type of assessment actually brings down the level of revocations that we have in the state.
Great, thanks, James. All right, let's hear from Rob now about recommendations about reentry and where you think reform is most needed or resources are most needed.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning again. My name is Rob Hebert. I chair the Bridgeport Reentry Collaborative, and I'm one of the vice presidents from Career Resources, which is located in Bridgeport. In that function, in that role, I supervise all of our reentry programming, including a 60-bed residential program for work release. So I got to back up just a little bit. As part of the Connecticut Reentry Collaborative, we began doing some work last fall to rewrite and update the reentry strategy for the state of Connecticut. Some of you heard this story already. I mean to bore you, but as we were going along, it got to be the end of the fall, and I had gotten a request to join the Criminal Justice Committee for the transition team, for Governor Lamont's transition team. And it occurred to me that we had some good fortune. Timing doesn't usually work out for us, at least not for me. But what I was able to do was insert many of the recommendations in the reentry strategy into the transition team's work, including, in that grouping of items was, making sure that no one is released from DOC without viable photo identification, meaning, DMV, so they can secure employment and/or housing. Along the same lines was clean slate legislation, which we just had a hearing on last week, SB 691. Many of you, including my friend Michael Askew, was there, and it was great to see that we actually got that, not to the finish line, but at least we got the conversation really in front of the legislators. About me, though, I think I come at this with an interesting perspective. I've been doing this kind of work, if you want to count the criminal justice work, for 23 years. I initially worked with juveniles. I was a police officer, a probation officer. I worked for a DEMIS-funded program with duly diagnosed folks, schizophrenics mostly, substance abuse, who had justice involvement. And then I moved into job developing for the state with the same sort of folks. And so, my perspective on things has changed over the years. And I think we have come a long way. I really do. I often talk about our friends in the parole department, and they're not the same parole officers from when I started. Our clients now are much less afraid to engage with them, which is a great thing. They are more apt to let parole know when they're having a hard time and get assistance. Same thing with probation. But again, do we have a long way to go? I think so. Changing hearts and minds is a very hard thing. I work with folks, not directly anymore, but my staff does every single day, who get turned down for employment, who get turned down by housing. I never understood housing being as big of an issue as it is, but when I was reviewing some of the written testimony for SB 691 before I came and testified last week, it was interesting to see that the first, I think, was 6 or 7 submitted statements were all in opposition to 691, all written by landlords. So again, a lot of work left to be done. I don't know exactly how we get there, but we can't stop the conversation. I think folks like me, who don't typically look like the majority of folks who are incarcerated, I got to bring the conversation to my community. I mean, I think it starts with all of us engaging our families, our friends, and letting them know who these people are. I often say, for almost 7 years I was a police officer, and I think I might have arrested one bad guy. The people that I come in contact with were high, drunk, having a mental health crisis, going through an incredibly difficult personal time in their lives, and the justice system ran into that. Those aren't bad people. Those are folks who need resources and need help, and need a break. My friend Michael Askew was testifying about 691 Clean Slate, and he had, I was sitting in the audience, and he made a comment about, in response to a question from a legislator, forgive me, I don't remember his name, but Michael said that one of the reasons that Clean Slate would be a good idea is because many folks who've been formerly incarcerated they come to the conclusion they don't want to seek a traditional pardon because of fear. And this particular legislator could not wrap his mind around the idea that somebody could be afraid to ask for a pardon. And I knew exactly where Mike was coming from because I've been told the same thing by hundreds of clients over the years. And so, back to education. I think we have to keep the conversation going. I think we got to let educators know what's going on. I think more of them need to be in the prisons, and walk the halls and talk to folks and get an understanding of really what they've been through and what they're going through as best as they can. And you can't be in someone else's skin. But that day, and Michael, I know you didn't intend to have that particular conversation, but it was very telling. Not the stupidity of people, but clearly the ignorance of what the real problem is. So I want to thank you for testifying that day. Regarding IDs, the last time I spoke about that, I had a conversation with some friends at the Department of Corrections who are here today. I want to thank them. They're actually, as I'm sitting here talking to you, Department of Corrections is sitting at my facility in Bridgeport doing a co-training with the Career Resources case managers and Connecticut Renaissance case managers on ID procurement, so that can help us do a better job and more quickly prepare people for the workplace and housing. And again, 23 years ago, I suspect that wasn't happening. So hats off to DOC for how far they've come. I think that's all I got for now.
Thanks, Rob. Did you want to say anything about Director of Reentry, that idea, or?
So some of the things that we championed in the committee was the ID issue, and I know Governor Lamont has proposed more money in the DOC budget for ID procurement. I also know there was an increase in the budget, and my understanding is for community-based services. I don't know what that's going to look like, if that's parole or if that's folks like myself and Domus Academy and CCAR doing our work, but it's good to see that was there. However, and maybe I need to get educated here, maybe Mark can say something about that. I have not heard any conversation about the appointment of a Director of Reentry. That's disappointing to me if that's the case. It's incredibly disappointing to me, actually, because that was one of the hot button issues. A lot of qualified people that could do it. The Connecticut Reentry Collaborative, I thought, my recommendation was that individual should come out of a recommendation from the statewide Reentry Collaborative, because we would probably know best who to put in that position. But again, to my knowledge, I think we're at not even a starting place yet, but maybe.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor to be with everybody today. It's been really incredible to see your presence around the Capitol so far this morning, and it's reflective, I think, of what makes this session feel different from previous sessions, which is to a greater degree the voices of people who have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system are impacting discussions that are happening around the hallways, whether it's the 3 lobbyists that work as part of the ACLU, whether it's a broader Smart Justice campaign, whether it's your efforts today and every day to make sure that people who are considering analysis, considering policy ideas, considering budget recommendations are hearing directly from people whose lives have been affected by the criminal justice system. And I consider myself as someone who really is needing always to learn and be reminded of what it means to be in a prison, in a jail, on probation, on parole, appearing in front of the pardons board, being in contact with law enforcement, being in front of a prosecutor, meeting with a public defender, being in front of a judge. I mean, those are things that someone like me who feels incredibly passionate, I live this job, I love this job. I don't live the lives of the people who are sharing their stories around the Capitol today and have throughout the years. So I approach the microphone with a degree of humility. I have part of me that's saying, I'm feeling really good about kind of where we are on criminal justice reform, or just past the halfway point in the session. I'm also aware there's the rest of the session will indicate really what the final result is, and I also recognize that I'm not someone who has been in the criminal justice system. So I want to be sure that as I'm sharing optimism, I feel like I'm a naturally optimistic person. I don't want that to suggest in any way a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion, a lack of a desire to have greater understanding, compassion, and empathy for what it means to be directly impacted by the criminal justice system. I grew up in Connecticut. I worked for the last 10 years at a national nonprofit called the Council of State Governments Justice Center on justice reinvestment, and that brought me to around 13 states around the country, roughly 9 to 12 months in a year. I'd be traveling there intensively, and I was in places from Wyoming to Nebraska, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And so I fought for reform in those states where I worked, but I always wanted to come back to my home state. And so this is the opportunity of a lifetime to work for Governor Lamont as his Undersecretary of Criminal Justice Policy and Planning. I came to this job because I believe that he's someone from his heart to his head to his vision is completely committed to criminal justice reform. And I'm coming into this position really standing on the shoulders of the efforts that you and people across our state have put into criminal justice reform, juvenile justice reform, social justice, and not just the previous 10 years, but throughout your lives. And I had a chance in my last job to see my home state talked about in the national level. And I came in, and I was really so proud just to see the ways that states are looking at what Connecticut has done. You know, looking for case studies, looking for policy examples, looking for data, looking for stories of people who made these policies reforms possible. And that made me rush back to work in this state. When you come back into a state, it gets a lot more complicated really fast. When I worked in my last job, I would often say to a given state, you know, your approach to reducing the secure confinement of juveniles is being cited as a model nationally. And I look at people in cramped office quarters, and they would say back, are we really on the cutting edge? Are we really the ideal? Are we really the utopia? And I would realize that the situation gets a lot more complex when you're actually in the room, when you're in the discussions around policy, when you're in the agencies, when you're in the organizational units around our state. And I guess I feel that way too. I feel really good about three things I've seen Governor Lamont do in big picture, and I'm really hopeful that we can really build on that. Within 3 weeks of being in office, Governor Lamont made his first visit to a prison. He went to Cheshire Correctional Institution, to the True Unit, and I'd been there 3 times previously, and I was really eager to see how the governor would interact while interacting with the mentees and mentors, and it was immediate that his heart was full. He spoke with everybody he could in that room, and he said and at one point he was so moved, he asked to stand in front of the room and to address the entire group. And he said that, I want you all to know that the citizens of the state of Connecticut believe in you, and we all want you to have amazing futures. And what I thought is one thing to be moved to that place, because it showed me that he is someone who responds immediately to the stories of people directly impacted, but also on an individual and on a unit-wide perspective, he wanted to really carry forward those messages and make a difference. Number 2, his budget proposal, I knew it was going to be a tough budget year, and I watched discussions evolve and really was hopeful that there would be really good highlights of criminal justice reform to include, and I was really happy with that as a first step. I think the governor is too. I will break those out into 3 different categories. The first is to increase fairness and transparency in our criminal justice system. The governor introduced Senate Bill 880, as gentleman to my right mentioned, David McGuire, and he did an incredible job of covering the prosecutor data and transparency pieces. The other part that I think is really exciting is that the governor's proposed budget includes funding for representation for people at parole violation hearings. I was struck by James's points that he made regarding opportunities to reduce parole violations for condition violations. Because of the hard work of people through Yale Law School and partners and agencies in our state, the issue has risen to the surface that we provide right to counsel to people at the court, but not at the parole violation stage. And I can only imagine how hard it must be to navigate that complex parole violation hearing process if you're incarcerated, if you are experiencing a mental health disorder, a substance addiction, you're without means, etc. So the budget includes that, as does Senate Bill 880. Number two is to promote recovery. The governor is really driven by mental health, substance use, co-occurring disorders, and its overlap with the criminal justice system. It's those unaddressed substance use and mental health needs are a main driver of violations of probation and parole and other parts of our system. The governor recommended $6 million over 2 years to expand medication-assisted treatment in prison. That's one aspect of substance use disorder, opioids. There's a much larger use, and that's a very, I think, positive and dramatic first step. Third is lowering barriers to second chance. And Rob did a really great job of covering the issue of the state IDs. I've been in central office DOC and sat with reentry counselors and went through spreadsheets and folders and files regarding state IDs, and I would echo what Rob said, that it is impressive how dedicated our agency is to connecting people with IDs. There's also funding in the budget for bus passes for people leaving prison. How in the world do we expect people to succeed in reentry if they have nowhere to go to get home, to then get connected to a job, to employment, to services? I would also include clean slate. The governor asked me to submit testimony in favor of Senate Bill 691 and has tasked me with helping to plan for how that bill could develop moving through the system. And the anti-discrimination policy, HB 6921. Commissioner Cook, our head of corrections, submitted a video interview supporting that and that effort. And I guess I would, knowing we have more discussion to come, I think that's a good start. It gets me excited, it gets my kind of juices flowing, my blood flowing in the morning, and why I love this job and why I love working for Governor Lamont on these issues. But I think along with sustaining momentum, I think also the two things I would emphasize as areas to really focus on are how do you support the community, that if we are expecting people to succeed during the reentry period or to avoid incarceration, which is of course the goal, are there adequate services and supports to help people to achieve that? And then how do we expand reform to new areas, across new areas of intersection across our state? The more that we can build partnerships with housing, with substance use, mental health service providers, with other parts of our system, the more we can really appreciate that we are all invested in reentry outcome improvements, and we are all invested in criminal justice system improvements. So I hope that message is coming across as an area where really good start, but just like the legislative session, we're only the beginning, and the real work lies ahead. And people like me who are eager to learn and continue to be inspired by the work and success that you all have had, let's channel that into discussions on criminal justice reform to increase investment in achieving these successes in our state.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the panelists. And I'd just like to say it's exciting for me to see someone in your position to have so much interest in learning and getting to know. We know that the three people that held the key positions in pushing criminal justice reform in the last administration, Governor Malloy, Commissioner Semple, and Mike Lawler, had all been a part of the system for 30 some odd years, and had really had a real sense of what direction they wanted to go in right from the get-go. And you know, that's certainly, you know, the folks that are taking those positions, which no other state had, and certainly Connecticut didn't have before that, and do have some big shoes to fill. But I think what's exciting about it is that there's an open mind, there's learning going on, and there's an opportunity to even move it, I think, further down the road with an attention to the detail that I know you have and others. So at this point, I think we'd like to open it up to some Q&A. I saw some, there were some hands in the audience, and just also note that we'll probably go to about 11:45 or so for the Q&A. I do also want to mention real quickly that it's going to be after that. We'll do a quick wrap up and then lunch on your own. Really encourage folks to go to room 2600 if you haven't already. Find who your legislator is. Go leave a card or a statement with them. And also, the Judiciary Committee hearing is going on right now. I know James mentioned one of the bills that's on the agenda today, 6723, in terms of reform of parole. Anybody can sign up for that. So anybody in this room, if they want to go over there and sign in, and you don't have to submit testimony, you can also do that later, just to even get familiarized with that process. But feel free to step up to the mic there too. I saw some questions. Yes.
Yes, I understand that the issue of funding has come up quite often during this roundtable topic, but aside from our state population of offenders, we also have a large population of people who come out of the FBOP. So is there any collaboration with the federal government to secure funding for any of these initiatives?
Thank you for your question, sir. I think the state often is where we begin with discussing it because we're administering our correction system. But you raise a good point. There's also people returning from the federal system, and there's often a great deal of overlap. I think that I would say that in terms of our state government, we are state and local government focused. I think that the federal government is crucial in terms of additional funding sources and resources that are available, whether you're looking at veterans or leveraging federal grants from the new, especially on the issue of opioid use disorders. There's an enormous amount of federal money flowing into states now that our Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services is leveraging. But I'd say you're right to note that we are state and local focused, but there is a federal element to be part of.
I'm not sure if that answers your question. I think you were saying that coming out of the federal system, is there anything available for you on the state level?
Well, I've worked in programs where we have federal people that they come from our communities often, they get indicted, they go to the federal prison system, and they come out. They also have the same challenges of reentry, but there's a segregation between state and federal. But when they come out, they're looking for the same employment opportunities, the same housing opportunities. They face the same barriers. So if we're going to be trying to assist these individuals, we should try to get as much funding, secure as much funding as possible. The federal government should be kicking some of that funding to you guys. There should be a way where you can secure that through grants or what have you. The money is there. I know it's there for a fact.
What I'd like to say on that is I don't think there's been enough coordination. I know with the roundtables, in Hartford, we had someone from federal probation that used to sit on there, and you would often have folks come to some of the conferences and the like. But in terms of the full-on coordination, a few years back, I know Senator Murphy, I think he was congressman at the time, was passionate about juvenile justice issues and was able to secure some funding for that. But in my estimation, we have not done a tremendously good job at that.
Yeah, I'll just flag that there are these federal reentry courts now, I think in Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven. And that's where sort of a judge, if someone's on federal supervised release, they might be able to qualify for the reentry court program, and there are various resources that can be provided through those. But I understand they're quite small programs and may not provide support for all the people who need it. But that might be a good place to start in terms of finding people and judges who are interested in furthering support for the federal folks coming home.
I will
Point. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Just one quick thing. I will tell you that if, so we don't get, except for I think 2 agencies in the state, actually maybe one, CSI, Community Solutions. I don't really know of anyone that gets funding, but all the state programs, at least the ones that come to the Bridgeport Reentry Roundtable, and I'm pretty sure Hartford and everywhere else, if you come in as a federal returning citizen, we're gonna help you. You're not going to be excluded because you did federal time. So, I mean, it kind of dilutes the state money that we get to spread services to federal returning citizens.
It should be supplementing what you do because you're providing services to more than just DOC guys. This is also encompassing the FBOP. There's a tremendous population that's coming from Bridgeport, Haven, Hartford, which are going to the FBOP, and when they get out, guess where they're coming back? To Connecticut. So we have to be able to accommodate for these guys, and these numbers fall outside of what you may be looking at within the DOC.
From someone that deals with a tight budget all the time in the nonprofit world, I can't disagree. Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, and maybe we can huddle a little afterwards, after today, and talk a little bit about that and see, put our heads together about how we can do that better. There, and then we have here, and then...
My question is more about some of the things that you were talking about, like in the prison. I must be in another state because these things that I've been out 3 weeks now, and I did 14 years in prison, and they serve slop. The water's contaminated. It's black mold, asbestos all over the place, breathing it in every single day. I just don't see where the funding is going. You don't have education in there. I got a college education through my own self. I had to pay for it. Even when you go to medical, the funds allotted by the federal government, when you come into prison, you're supposed to be classed as indigent. But they don't see it that way. The only way they see it is like this. Any inmate without funds from 0 to 90 days is classified as indigent. And they're supposed to give him all the things he needs: medical, mental, health, and dental, and hygiene stuff to take care of himself. And he's not supposed to, that's supposed to be given. But as soon as that inmate receives funds, the prison system is making them pay it back. And I find that corrupt, because you're already getting paid for the stuff. How are you going to make a prisoner pay it back? That just seems like, and then I hear what you guys saying, and if you guys are working from the heart and it's true, I commend you. But believe me, in prison, all you hear is don't come back to jail. Don't come to jail. I don't know, write your senator. Dude, I don't know about the fake one. I'm just telling you about what I know. And that's why I'm telling you, I live on the corner of Garden and Martins. That's blood territory. You go down there, any one of you, try to talk to them kids. See what happens. The last person that I ever trusted in this government thing was Ella Grosso, because she came to the hood and she talked to the people. She implemented programs for preventive maintenance. During that time, you'd have all this crap going on. So my question is really this: where is all the money that she used to use for free lunch programs, night gym, arts and craft for these children, so they can know that life is not just about picking up a gun and killing somebody? What happened to all that? Where's it going? Because it sure as hell ain't going in the, I'm sorry. It's sure not going to resurrect the neighborhood. It's still just as poor as ever. I've been here 40 years. So I mean, I'm confused by that.
They can't answer that. And you 100% right. To this day, I've been home 2.5 years. I have issues with seeing a doctor because of how adversarial medical was for 19.5 years. And I didn't understand the bureaucracy of it until I heard like 40 nurses testify a month ago, because to me, they was the problem. They had no empathy. It was just a check, until I heard them say that the way that their budget is structured, the ratio of nurse to incarcerated person is 1:44, and their empathy is fatiguing. And I don't, in that moment, I got it, but I didn't want to get it, because that's not what it felt like to me for 19.5 years. It felt like shame. It felt vulnerable, and I wrestled with going to see a doctor today. I don't have that relationship. The water in Osborne is brown. It's killing people. Like, you were 100% right. There's problems with the system that this panel can't address. But I'm glad you're bringing it up, because it's also not being said, right? There's a senator in this building who represents all those prisons, right? Prisons they can operate like black sites. No surprise inspections. Everything got to be scheduled. You know the routine.
That's one of the reasons I came here, because I want somebody to hear, because I promised those guys that I would go and say something. Because nobody's listening to him.
And trust me, there's more incarcerated people in this building now than there ever has been. You got 2 standing at the door, 3 standing at the door right there. You know, like, people are in this building bringing our voice to this building. You know, but I'm glad that you're here to do the same thing. I'd ask you to take it a step farther and to engage, to start submitting your testimony to a lot of these bills being presented, and even go a step farther than that and start partnering people in with us to start authoring the right bills, right? Start reading these budgets and asking these questions to appropriations. Where is the money going? Because currently in this room, I don't think anybody can answer it, but if you go but appropriations has hearings on budgets, and you can ask them, well, what is this line item? How about a pre-audit? So we can see where the money's going. You can start asking questions and building a stronger voice. And I go to church on 127 Martha. I talk to them kids, you know. So, and I'm not from Hartford, but I know the territory. It's just they know all the kids in my neighborhood where I'm from. So, I hear you.
But I gotta commend this program though, prisons. This is the best thing I've ever seen coming out of jail. These men don't get paid a lot, they work hard, and they do things to really help. They don't just talk, blow smoke. They do it for real. And they need more of those programs like that.
Yeah, I'd like to say about Chrysalis too, because that's right around where I live. I live on Sargent Street, and you know, I've been in the neighborhood for 20 years, and Chrysalis was trying to build the center off of Huntington, and but the neighborhood and the people that were essentially a part of a neighborhood group did not want that to occur. And so I think a lot of this message also has to go back into the places where people may not have, there might be more need for education as well. And, you know, there's a perception of safety that people think that they can get by, you know, having police on the streets or things like that, and they don't realize the repercussions of investing solely in that and not the places like Chrysalis. And I know Chrysalis was in the process of trying to get some more residential off of Asylum, and I'm hoping that will happen as well. But I agree with James that your voice is really important in this, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And the gentleman before you as well, I mean, that, and where Mark was working before, this concept of justice reinvestment exactly asked that question. If we're saving money, where are those savings going? Traditionally, they've gone back into the system, but initially they were designed to go back into the very neighborhoods where people are coming from. So hopefully voices like yours will help to continue that conversation in terms of that urgency.
Can I just continue with what he said? You said there's a senator in this building who's in charge of all the prisons, those prisons with the brown water?
He's not in charge of them. They're in his district.
Well, I'm just wondering if that's somebody he would pose those questions to. If you can't answer them, maybe asking him those questions that he just asked?
I guess since this is a political building, I should be politically correct and say yes.
That's fact.
And so I'm hearing this theme of reinvestment and where's the money. And the fact that there's a lot of people coming out of prison that, you know, and I think it's like $62,000 a year. Is that the number at this point? That where can we not invest this money when people come out of prison so that they can stay out? And I remember a few years back there was an early release of prisons that allowed an X number of people to leave, that they were going to leave in the next 6, 8, 10 months anyway. So if we look at 1,000 people leaving, does that help support individuals by reinvesting that money into the community? And my thought is, why not put it in the community and so that they can stay in the community? I'm even looking at how that reinvestment, you can make jobs with that kind of money. You can put people in apartments at $1,000 a month. That's only $12,000. So I'm just saying, why can't we reinvest money in our communities for people that really need, because like me, coming out of prison is hard to get a job in a place to live. It is, and that was 30 years ago. And I see now more so it's difficult because there's people that can't get a job and can't get a housing. How can we not want to invest in those two areas on the budget of a governor that if he says he wants to help, why can't he do it that way?
I appreciate the first gentleman who spoke. I wanted to apologize for taking time to process. I just was so struck by what you shared, and I really admire you for so soon after your return to the community to come make a point of coming to this Capitol. The Capitol benefits from your presence here. Your words penetrate both the mind and the heart. To answer your question, sir, I think that the reinvestment part is often the hardest part to follow through on. The policies or the trends that lead to the outcomes we want to see, which is fewer people locked up, can make it challenging to ensure that those resources don't just wind up back in the general fund. They actually reach the communities that are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system, and that to ensure that our system and our providers are adequately resourced to work with that population. I think roughly 19,000 people leave incarceration in a given year. That's a lot of people who come back. And a lot of people face the same challenges you've mentioned regarding housing and employment and treatment and overcoming discrimination. And I have heard that since I started, that the resources really need to flow to keep up with the population. And however you talk about the driver to achieve those changes can be brought about by the personal stories of people who are seeking a successful reentry and a safe reentry, whether you're looking at true actual savings, because I would argue that if you achieve reductions in incarcerated populations, but the dollars don't reach the populations, those people are vulnerable to, and possible to come right back in and not save you any money. And then three, there's arguments about public safety, that recidivism reduction, that fewer people returning to prison makes for a safer state. So no matter what angle you come at it, from a social justice perspective, from a fiscal conservative position, or just good government, it all makes sense. I would say that it is a challenge in our budget climate. And we've had several consecutive years of really tough budgets. And the easiest programs to cut are the ones that that are in the community. Because it's hard for people, I think, to realize, to make budget decisions about what that impact of that cut will be. If you're talking about changes to bricks and mortar, it's a prison. But if it's a program, it becomes less tangible from what I've observed since I started. And so what I've been trying to argue so far is that these are actually tied into the budget. That we could calculate, and we got to calculate, how much money does Connecticut spend in a given year incarcerating people who are revoked from probation or from parole for condition violations, and say, we're spending this much money anyways, can't we enact policy to reduce that number of people coming back and reinvest a portion of our savings into things that we all care about? That's a looking forward sort of argument. It doesn't address the wrongs of the past, but I hope it's based on the people who are now trying to contribute to the solution, will at least give some solace to those who are coming to do the hard work today to advocate on behalf of people returning from DOC in our state.
Thanks. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm Chris Turchin. I'm ex-convict, and I've been, these programs, they definitely need to pass these bills. I've been out for a year and been looking for a job for 6 months. And, they're not allowed to ask you if you're a convicted felon, but they just skip around that and they go to the background check. So they don't ask you, they just look up your name. This guy's a convicted felon. Sorry, we can't help you. And they move on. And these bills got to be put on the front burner because the state says you do X amount of time and you get out, you're a free man again. I'm not free. I'm not free to live where I want to live because I have a background. They do a background check, and they're not going to let you live where you want to, where I want to feel safe and comfortable. and contribute to society, I can't do that. I can't get the job that I want because they won't hire me because of my background. So you say you're free now, be free and have a good life, but how can you do that if at every point, every turn, you're blocked from doing so? You want me to do all these good things, but how can I do them if you won't let me? It's a double standard. And we need to get these bills passed so that these men and women, including myself, can move on with their lives and do something with them. You can't just say, you're free, go ahead, good luck now, and then say in the same yeah, but I'm not going to hire you. I'm not going to give you a job. I'm not going to let you live in this neighborhood. You know, we need to get this on the front burner and get it done so people can change their ways. Because if I'm stuck not having a job, if I'm stuck not living where I feel comfortable, where am I? What am I going to do? It's going to be recidivism. You know, that's how it starts, but that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, no one can dispute that people are discriminated against every day based on their criminal record. And like you say, it shouldn't be a life sentence once you've served your sentence. So all I can say, and this is kind of echoing what James said, justice impacted folks and allies have to be here and making their voice loudly heard, because these types of bills like the anti-discrimination bill and finding a way not just to put all the savings back into the general fund will not happen without a real movement. And there's big special lobbies that are going to push hard not to let these bills through. And there are legislators, and there are Democrats as well as Republicans, who don't see the benefit in funneling funds back to justice impacted communities. They want to just fill the holes in the budget and divert the funds back to the suburbs, essentially. So thank you for speaking up. And 6921 is really the bill that I think needs to be focused on. It's going to be very difficult to pass, but they need to be confronted with the real need for this from people that are directly impacted.
Also, outside of pushing bills, a friend of mine put me on to something that I'm not hold true to. I won't eat, shop, drink, anything. If you won't hire me, then you know you can't get my business, and you can't get nobody I deal with business. And the more we organize ourselves like that and our families like that, you'll see them come into, and even take it further. If you know, minimum wage has never kept up with inflation. It's I was looking at it last week, and since the federal institution of minimum wage at 25 cents in 1936, which is equivalent to like $4.78 today. So think about that. In 82 years, minimum wage has only risen $5.70, something like that, $5.50. If it had kept with inflation, it'd be at about roughly $20 right now. And so, like, if the only job you want to qualify me for is to work $10 an hour, to where there's nowhere in Connecticut I can live on my own, and at that rate, I don't want to eat or shop there either, right? And the more we organize ourselves like that, we become our biggest. I mean, you come into a building and you're waiting on someone to vote. You know, you're voicing your opinion, but you're waiting on someone else to vote, to give you something, and that's a part of the process. The other side is take it. You start denying these places your business and getting vocal around them. You know, we make ourselves our biggest advocates and our biggest allies. People do things. It's enough of us. The one thing mass incarceration has created is a mass pool of people impacted. So the more we organize ourselves, you know.
Anybody else? Yeah, gentleman on this side, I apologize, I forgot your name. In your remarks, you said that some people were afraid to ask for a pardon, and I've never heard that before. I'm just kind of wondering if you could explain that a little bit.
So yeah, last week, actually I was repeating a comment from Mike Askew from CCAR, who's on the other side of the room. I've known Michael for a while, and like I said, I've been working directly with impacted people for a very long time, as far back as when I was doing the impacting. And they have told me that any involvement with the criminal justice system, going up to the Board of Pardons and Paroles for them is just like driving down the street and seeing a cop car behind them. They don't see a difference. What I've been told, they don't see a difference. Seeing the justice system as anything except oppressive and scary is not possible for some of the folks that I help. And that was what Mr. Askew was trying to explain to the legislature, because the question that was posed to Mike was, why don't people just go through the normal pardon process as if it's an easy thing? I can remember looking over the paperwork years ago and saying, Jesus, I don't want to do this. It's like a dissertation. And another thing that we're trying to express to them, and like I voiced earlier, is many people that end up in handcuffs are going through a terrible time in their life, something that many of us can't understand. They come to the back of the police car with trauma, abuse, abandonment, mental health issues, addiction issues. And so they get out of jail, they straighten their lives out, they get the help they need, they're on the right course, and the only way to get relief from their past is to relive it in front of a pardon board. And this particular gentleman, he couldn't wrap his mind around the idea that there could be a fearfulness involved with going back there, kind of re-traumatizing yourself. Because let's face it, folks that are in jail now, going to be in jail shortly, just came out of jail, many of them share the fact that they have trauma in their past, whether it was before they went in, whether it happened while they were in, or dealing with the fact that they were in. So that was sort of the center of that conversation, and it made me think, while I was there, back to the conversation about we've come so far, but we have so far to go. We have attorneys who are now legislators. They're leading our state. They are the beating heart of what happens here in Hartford, and they could not wrap their minds around what trauma and fear is, and that was disappointing for me to hear, and that's why I brought it up.
Also, HB 6723, it's being argued today. Actually, part of that legislation is to streamline the pardon process. If you ever seen the packet, it's insane. So it's to actually streamline the packet and to make it not just non-intimidating, to where you don't have to present yourself before a board. Yeah, it'll be an automatic. The only way you will present is if your case involves a victim and they want you to present before the board. Yeah, for serious crime. Outside of that, there's no reason to. So that bill is being heard now in judiciary. Also, I think there's a part of fair that I don't know. I know in my experience, when Connecticut created the juvenile parole, I was one of the first 10 people to go up, and I went up. And I looked good on paper. Did a lot. And so, unable to shoot me down, the question became, are you going to apply for a pardon? And it was said, so it was repeatedly asked, and I wasn't answering it. And it was repeatedly asked as if somehow my freedom hung on, me saying yes or me saying no. And so you create fear in a lot of ways. Like I said, parole needs metrics. That they can be held accountable to, that I can be held accountable to, and they don't have that right now. To where they could deny, I could have got denied if, I had said, yeah, I plan on applying for a pardon.
Bill? I think we're on that short side. Rejection can put you in a mindset of not wanting to ask for a pardon, because I don't want to get rejected, so I won't deal with that at all. I have assisted people in trying to get pardons. It is traumatizing for them in the process of that pardon, because they're presenting themselves before a group, just as James said, It is hell for a person who has been through it, and here's another rejection coming down the line. I don't have that shit, you know, so they'll stay away from it because of that.
I think it's appropriate that we're ending the conversation this morning on the pardons process, because when I first started working with Bill, one of the things that we tried to do initially, this was in 2003, we brought together a working group of some folks that are actually here in the room to look at the pardons process, because this idea of hope, a light at the end of the tunnel, at that point was so minute. It was essentially run out of someone's garage in New Haven. The pardons process did not grow with the incarcerated population, and so we looked to expand it, and that was successfully done. But I think people also have to realize what also happened recently. As a friend of mine went to go get a pardon, they FOI'd and they made it available now to the press to be able to do that. So you might be 20 years past something and asking for a pardon, and all of a sudden everything not only comes out in front of the pardons board, but it comes out in the press again too. And one thing that I think we should take note of is in the German system, where we were watching in the beginning, which we're looking to model as a place of dignity, they don't even have arrests as part of the public sphere. So you, like the gentleman was saying, he had no idea what that guy did that was so egregious that he wasn't going to be let out, because he couldn't find that anywhere. And that may seem like it's like the gentleman said from Pennsylvania, it's crossing the Grand Canyon. But when you take everything else into context, I think it's worth considering in terms of who has to ask for a pardon, who got in the system in the first place, how those people's mugshots get up there more likely than folks from different communities, and all those other things, that pardons process, and how the punishment in our system has been perpetual and not just, as they do in the German system, the taking away of the freedom. It's been this continuous process of reminding people of what they did in their worst times. And so I think it's important that we have that conversation about the role of the pardons process in terms of how we look at the system in general.